Imagine for a moment that the story of Jesus is just the tip of the iceberg, and that somewhere in the world there are accounts that fill in the gaps that the traditional Bible left in silence. From the age of 12, when we see him in the temple discussing with the teachers, until he begins his ministry at 30, there is an absolute silence. These are almost 2 decades that do not appear in the Gospels, years that scholars call the lost years. However, deep in Africa, in the ancient lands of Ethiopia, there are texts and oral traditions that tell another story. A story in which Jesus was not inactive, but traveled, learned, and had experiences that would forever mark his mission on earth. Ethiopia is not just any country in biblical terms. It is home to one of the oldest Christian churches, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which claims to be the guardian of sacred texts that were never accepted into the Western canon. Among them, the enigmatic Kebra Nagast and other manuscripts are preserved in stone monasteries, inaccessible to most. Their contacts with figures that some relate directly to the life of Jesus are mentioned. The Ethiopian monks, guardians of a millennial faith, transmit stories that speak of a young master who came from the north, with skin tanned by the sun, deep eyes, and words that disarmed anyone. They say his wisdom was so great that the priests listened to him in silence, and that his compassion for the poor and the sick knew no bounds. According to these traditions, Jesus would have spent part of those years in African lands, possibly in the Axum region, the capital of the ancient Ethiopian kingdom. There, where Christianity took root before Europe even adopted it, he would have learned customs, songs, natural medicine, and ancestral tales that spoke of the one God. Some manuscripts even suggest that he met with wise descendants of the Queen of Sheba, the same one who visited King Solomon centuries earlier. In those conversations, Jesus would have heard stories about the Ark of the Covenant, which, according to Ethiopian tradition, is still guarded in the Church of St. Mary of Zion. But Jesus' connection to Ethiopia does not end there. The canonical scriptures tell us about an important Ethiopian in the book of Acts, Candace's eunuch, whom Philip baptizes. This shows that there was already a deep link between the Christian faith and Ethiopia from its beginnings. If that is what is officially recorded, what else might have been experienced outside of the approved texts? The Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserves more than 80 sacred books in its version of the Bible, many more than those found in the Catholic or Protestant Bibles. Among them, there are passages that describe mysterious figures, journeys of holy men, and visions of distant heavens and lands. Some researchers have proposed that certain passages, although not mentioning Jesus by name, could be narrating episodes of his youth in another context. The fascinating thing is that these chronicles describe a righteous man who spoke in parables and performed healing miracles, long before the Gospels record it. The possibility that Jesus was known in Ethiopia before his public ministry opens up huge questions. Could African spirituality have influenced his message of equality and universal love? Could he have taken elements from ancient Ethiopian laws and their profound respect for the most vulnerable? In an era when trade routes linked Egypt, Arabia, India, and East Africa, it would not be strange for a young seeker of truth to travel those roads. And if we talk about Jesus, a man capable of challenging the religious norms of his time, traveling and learning from other cultures would fit perfectly into his character. The Ethiopian monks who speak of these stories today do so with caution. For them, it is not a conspiracy theory, but a legacy that is part of their faith. They believe that these accounts do not contradict the Bible, but rather fill in the blank spaces. For them, Jesus is not the property of a single culture or people, but belongs to all of humanity. And his time in Ethiopia would be one more proof that his message crossed borders before his disciples openly preached it. Of course, this information is not free from controversy. More conservative academics point out that there is no direct archaeological evidence to confirm these journeys. However, others argue that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and that oral tradition, especially in ancient cultures like the Ethiopian, is a valuable testimony. In fact, many biblical stories were transmitted orally for centuries before being written down. So, what do we do with this information? We can dismiss it as an unimportant curiosity, or we can allow ourselves to think that the life of Jesus was even richer and more complex than we imagine. Perhaps those lost years were not a time of silence, but a time of preparation, a time when he traveled dusty roads, heard foreign languages, learned from the wise, and embraced people of all nations. Imagine for a moment Jesus in the green hills of Ethiopia, looking at the horizon as the sun sets, thinking about the words he would one day say in Galilee. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Perhaps those words were not just a command, but a reflection of something he himself had already lived. And if so, then we will understand that his message was not born in an isolated corner, but was forged at the crossroads of cultures. In the encounter with the other, in the embrace of a world much wider than we usually imagine.